Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Glenn Morris, for those I haven't had the chance to meet. I am the CEO at the Santa Maria Valley Chamber of Commerce, but more importantly today, I have the opportunity of serving as the chair of the Tri-County Chamber Alliance. And on behalf of the board of the Alliance, we want to welcome you to our annual meeting and legislative review and update. We're very pleased with the program that we put together for you today and are excited to hear the presentations that are coming. Let me make a couple of logistical announcements. We all are probably pretty familiar with this approach by now, but as a reminder, we are recording today's session and it will be available through your local Chamber of Commerce probably by the 1st of next week. After each of the two presentations, our speakers have graciously agreed to answer some questions. If you have a question that you'd like to have addressed, if you'll use the Q&A feature there at the bottom of the screen, and we'll get to as many as time allows for us today. So before I turn it over to our distinguished presenters, let me share just a quick update about the Alliance itself. Many of you have been supporters of our organization for some time, but you probably have known us as the Chamber Alliance of Santa Barbara and Ventura counties. Under that name, we have worked for many years to bring a coordinated advocacy program to bear, focused on state and federal issues. Recognizing that strength comes from numbers and that the issues that we need to address impact not just businesses in the two original counties, we made a decision recently to expand the Alliance to include all 3 of the Central Coast counties. This change was approved by the Alliance Board of Directors earlier this fall, and starting in the new year, we will welcome a number of chambers and their members from San Luis Obispo County as part of the Alliance. With that change, the board also approved a change of our name to the Tri-County Chamber Alliance. At full engagement, the Alliance will represent more than 20 chambers, covering something like 30 communities and more than 15,000 local businesses. At the same time, the Alliance will have connections with 8 state legislators and 3 or 4 congressional representatives. As we move into the new year with newly elected members in some of those seats, we will continue our efforts to identify the key policy issues and positions that best represent the needs of our businesses and to advocate for legislative outcomes that put our region in the best position possible for economic growth and vitality. We welcome your input and encourage you to share with your chamber's leadership teams those items of most concern for or against to your business and industry so that we can make sure we don't miss anything important. Now, let's get to the real reason we're here, and that's to hear from our speakers. We're really pleased to be joined by 2 partners that the Alliance works with on a regular basis to stay on top of what's happening at the federal and state level. Their presentations today couldn't possibly be more timely or relevant. So first, we'll hear from Neil Bradley. Neil is the Executive Vice President and Chief Policy Officer at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. He's going to share today some insights into what the U.S. Chamber is paying attention to and maybe polish his crystal ball a little and share what some of this will mean to us as we move forward. So Neil, I think we've got you set up to share your screen, and I will turn the podium over to you.
Well, thank you, Glenn. It's a pleasure to be with you and to be with the audience and with Fred today. Congratulations on the new name and the expansion. That's exciting times, and we're really looking forward to seeing what all that means in the advocacy and the issues that we are near and dear to all of our hearts. So I'm just going to pull up and share a quick presentation here that will walk through a little bit of where, from the U.S. Chamber's perspective, where we see the economy today, how that drives some of our policy priorities, both as we wrap up 2020 and as we move into 2021 with a new Congress and a new administration, and talk a little bit about what we might be able to do as chambers to effectuate some positive change. And then, of course, I'm really excited to get to your questions and your feedback and your comments. So let's start with where we see the economy today. From the Chamber's perspective, we believe we're in a K-shaped economic recovery. If you rewind to January of this year, we had a booming economy, generational low unemployment, business optimism and outlook was quite strong. And then, of course, the pandemic hit. And we all knew that we were going to take an economic hit because of the pandemic and the social distancing measures required to combat it. But we didn't know exactly what the recovery would look like. We hoped for what economists call a V-shaped recovery, and that's where the bounce back is just as sharp as the decline. We feared more of a U-shaped recovery, or a Nike swoosh recovery, if you will, where the economy remains depressed for a period of time and then slowly recovers. What we ended up getting, and what became evident towards the end of the summer, was we were getting a little bit of both. That for some industries and sectors, they had bounced back literally as strong as pre-pandemic levels, and in some instances, even stronger. But other industries, particularly those that require, that live off of getting people together, travel, tourism, the events industry, and of course, restaurants and hotels, continued to suffer. And that's exactly where we are today. You can see it in the employment numbers. These are from the most recent jobs report from November. We measure how we're doing in terms of employment by looking back to the pre-pandemic levels and measuring against February. We have a lot of sectors identified over there on the left-hand side where we are still significantly below, 100,000 or more jobs below where we were in February. If they're shaded, that means that that industry is off by more than 15% from where it was at the beginning of the year. And of course, topping the list, food, restaurant, drinking places, but also local education. In most of the country, we're experiencing remote and distance learning, and local governments have shed a lot of those educational jobs. And of course, when we think about hotels, amusements, gambling and recreation industries, even child daycare services. As more people work from home, in this moment, we were 173,000 jobs shorter than where we were before. But there's another side to that coin. And all those on the right-hand side have actually increased their level of employment relative to February. The magnitude isn't as small as the losses. That's why we're still 10 million plus jobs in the hole. But when you think about couriers, messengers, the warehouse stores, home improvement, which has actually been booming as people have sought to make improvements in their home as they're stuck at home. Amazon, Walmart, adding 100,000 jobs each. And of course, the delivery business to make all of that happen. Food and beverage stores, which are kind of meeting the demand for at-home delivery. There are some folks who are at the proverbial top of the K, if you will. One of the things that we're particularly concerned about in this moment, though, is what's happening to small businesses. And we had seen steady recovery over the course of the summer and into the fall of the small business picture overall. As the coronavirus began to surge again, particularly into November, those numbers have begun to change. And a lot of the government economic data that you get is an indicator of what the environment looked like a month or more ago, rather than a real-time analysis. The Census Bureau has actually been doing weekly surveys of over 100,000 businesses since the beginning of the pandemic that actually give us a great benchmark to be able to compare small business revenue, employment, changes in hours, and almost a real-time basis. And these were the numbers that were released last week for the poll done in the middle of November. In California, 39% of small businesses are reporting a decline in revenue, only 5% an increase. We have more than three times as many small businesses reporting that they're letting go of employees in California as are hiring. And as we all know, small businesses generally tend to first cut hours before they cut employees. And we're looking at 1 in 5 small businesses in California who are cutting hours. How does this stack up to where we've been over the course of the year? These numbers are tying the levels that we saw in late May and early June. In some instances, they're the worst over the course of the pandemic. We have fewer businesses reporting growth in employment and growth in revenue today than at any point since the tracking began in the beginning of March. This is one of the reasons that we are so set on getting a COVID relief, pandemic relief package through Congress next week. Because at the moment that we're at, we believe we're at a tipping point, and that absent additional relief, with the virus continuing to spread, these numbers are going to continue to get worse. They're going to begin to show up in the official statistics, as you begin to see today on initial unemployment claims, now at 835,000, reclimbing again for the first time since September. And if Congress fails to act, a lot of small businesses we know won't survive. If Congress does act and provides another round of the Paycheck Protection Program, provides additional support for the unemployed, including the 12 million Americans who will be kicked off unemployment insurance, 2.5 million in California on December 26th if Congress doesn't act, then we really risk a double dip recession. The good news is we're closer than we've been in months to a deal. We've been on the phone all day with senators who are in the middle of negotiating. The last two pieces are liability safe harbors and aid for state and local governments. In fact, senators are meeting right now on a new framework for that liability safe harbor that we think it represents a compromise from where we started, but we actually think is a workable solution that could get the bipartisan support we need to close out this deal in the next week. When we think about those winter headwinds, I mentioned the unemployment extension. I actually lowballed it. It's actually 2.9 million Californians who will get kicked off unemployment insurance on December 26th if Congress doesn't act. The CARES Act money that went to state and local governments, that expires, use it or lose it on December 31st. The tax relief, including the ability to delay your payment of payroll taxes, expires at the end of the year. And then, of course, the eviction and foreclosure moratoriums expire. That's a lot of headwind to put on an economy that is slowing. And that's why you see a lot of economists who are warning about that double dip recession. By the way, we know coming out of this, there's going to be some long-term trends that are going to change. One of the most evident is this move to online shopping. Here we've been tracking online sales share of total retail, and you see the gradual change over time. We've all talked about this before. And then you saw the jump in the pandemic year, and now we're beginning to settle into a new normal. This is going to remake the retail industry, and those businesses who can adapt to this are going to do well, and those who don't are ultimately going to fail. And so there's going to be some new normal when it comes to retail, office space, and other things as we come out of this pandemic. One of the biggest risks that we're talking to the incoming administration and Congress about is a repeat of what we saw during the Great Recession. That when we have Americans who are out of work for an extended period of time, sometimes they can fall out of the workforce entirely. And this is workforce participation for men and women in their prime working age years. We only have so long to get those levels back up to where they were, or we risk a slower, less dynamic economy going forward, and frankly, a lot of potential social unrest. When we look back to the Great Recession, one of the reasons that we could never break out of sub 3% growth, one of the contributing factors to the opioid epidemic and other social pressures was the fact that we had a lot of displaced men of prime working years who were displaced in the beginning of the recession and who never returned to the labor force. And that was a real drain on the overall economy. That's what we have to avoid. That's driving a lot of our considerations about the agenda as we head into next year. So as we think about forging an economic recovery, obviously we have to do this with a new administration and a new Congress. The voters gave us something that they haven't given us in 32 years, a new president entering office without his party controlling the House and the Senate. If you think back, you got to go all the way back to George H.W. Bush, the last time that a president, upon entering office, had to negotiate with the other party if they wanted to get anything done. This has the potential to break out of a very bad cycle that American politics had gotten itself into. A cycle where a president comes into office, his party controls Congress, they spend the first 2 years attempting to do big policy on a partisan basis. That's how the Affordable Care Act got done in the first 2 years of Obama. Under Trump, it was the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Here at the Chamber, we opposed one, supported the latter. But the truth is that we then ended up arguing for years over both policies. They become uncertain and unsettled. And then politically, the party in power, unified control, tends to lose that control in the midterm election. That produces legislative gridlock. And then administrations turn to regulation as their only means to get anything done. You'll remember that Barack Obama famously described this after his party lost control of Congress as saying, I may not have Congress, but I got a pen and I got a phone. And he was going to regulate his policy agenda. And of course, the problem was that Donald Trump had the exact same pen and the exact same phone, and he took everything swinging the other direction. And now Joe Biden enters office with the exact same tools, and he's going to swing it back the other way. So can Washington break this cycle? The other thing that the voters have given us is really narrow majorities. The Democratic majority, when it's all settled and done, is likely to be 5 seats in the House. We have 2 runoffs for Senate seats in Georgia on January 5th. Assuming Republicans keep both of those, they're going to have a 2-seat majority. If you look at the ability of Speaker Pelosi to advance her agenda, she can only lose 5 votes. We have 20+ chamber-endorsed Democrats who are going to be a check on a lot of that progressive wing of the agenda. If you look at the Senate, Republicans will be defending 21 seats heading into the election. They got a lot of incumbents who are going to want to get things done. And of course, Joe Biden is a creature of the Senate and of Washington. He has this famous relationship with Mitch McConnell and others. The real test will be, can these folks come together and figure out how to get a few important items across the finish line? What might that look like, and what are the priorities for the U.S. Chamber? It begins with COVID relief before the end of this year. We talked a little bit about where we stand on that today. We believe that the place to begin a bipartisan discussion that can produce results is around infrastructure. We'll be launching a program called Build by the 4th of July. Doesn't actually mean build the projects by then, but get the bill through Congress that will allow us to build those projects. It's going to be a more expansive version of infrastructure than many Republicans prefer, but not as an expansive of a version as many Democrats prefer. That's where the middle ground lies. So think about surface transportation, transit programs, in addition to renewable energy and telecommunications and broadband and resiliency for climate change. If we can do that, that'll provide a boost to the economy. And we know that one of the preeminent concerns that employers had before COVID was finding skilled workers to fill open slots. Now, what we're going to have is a lot of people in need of work whose skills don't match the jobs that exist. And we're going to have employers in a lot of sectors who need workers but can't find the ones with the right skills. So a workforce program, jobs training, skills program, combined with smart immigration reform, we think is the follow-on to that. We're very pleased to see the president-elect talking about making immigration a part of the first-year agenda. And of course, what we'd like to see is some legislative solutions in Washington to replace this regulatory pendulum that swings back and forth, and frankly, to deal with some of the issues that we're responding to because of what, frankly, your legislators in Sacramento are doing, whether that's data privacy or independent contractors. They're creating kind of a host of issues for the economy as a whole, and given California's size and importance, only Washington can settle some of these issues, and only Congress in Washington can settle them permanently. And so that's going to be a focus of ours as we turn into 2021. So I'll stop there. There's lots of other issues, of course, to work on Trade, China are top of mind for us as well. But that gives you a flavor, a little bit of what we're thinking about as we wrap up this year and head into the new year.
Thanks, Neil. We do have a couple of questions in the queue. I would also remind and invite the others in the audience, if you have a question for Neil, if you'll type that into the Q&A box there, we'll take a couple of those and see what we can get responses to. Neil, the first question comes from one of our attendees who's in the oil and gas extraction industry. He points out that your slide on employment shows that industry as increasing in employment. His question is, with the drop in the oil price, can you explain that increase?
Yeah, it's a pretty small increase. It's not very significant. And there's also a difference between core oil and gas producers and the support industries. You've actually seen a small decline in employment in the support sector in oil and gas. And remember, this is relative to February. And so if you think relative to February, a lot of the concerns and pressures on price obviously predate the pandemic. And so I wouldn't read much into the fluctuations there, other than that's kind of where the data has landed out.
Thank you. Next question comes from one of my colleagues with a local chamber. She asks if you have any data regarding job losses or closures in local chambers of commerce and what you're seeing from that kind of field force.
Yeah, we don't have good data on the number of closures. We do know anecdotally that there have been. The BLS data does break down associations as an employment category. We know from some other research that chambers of commerce are a major source of the employment in that category. And association employment is down significantly compared to February. It's not 100,000, so it didn't make that that list of the table that we provided at the beginning. But as a percentage, it's down fairly substantially. That's one of the reasons that we're pushing so hard that chambers of commerce have access to PPP as a part of this new agreement that's coming together. And so that, because I know some of the folks in the audience will care about that, it varies from hour to hour. Some hours we're getting really good reports that the language is going to work. Then it backslides into chambers will be eligible, but there'll be restrictions on eligibility based on how much they engage in advocacy. That's the real sticking point. We're trying to get that advocacy language either removed or set as a threshold that local chambers will have no problem clearing it and accessing the program.
Very good. A question here that says, are you aware of the SBA looking at getting regular SBA loan rates reduced? This individual indicates he has a couple of loans that right now are sitting at 7.5%.
There is conversation around both continued forbearance on loans and suspension of payments, which was done as part of the CARES Act. I believe there's some discussion around changing the interest rates, but to be honest, I don't know where that stands as part of these ongoing negotiations. I'll be happy to check, and we can circle back.
Great. Question around trade. Any crystal ball forecasting on what the president's approach is going to be relative to tariffs and unilateral versus multilateral trade agreements? What's your sense on where President Biden will head with
trade? He's going to have a very different approach than President Trump. One consistency over President Trump's last 30 years is that he's a fan of tariffs, and he viewed tariffs as a tool to address lots of problems. And he really didn't have qualms about who the tariffs were applied, whether it was friend or foe. Biden is going to take a different approach. He just announced yesterday evening his nominee for U.S. Trade Representative, a woman we've worked with extensively over the years. I would take the question in three buckets. tariffs on ex-China, so everywhere except China. I think what you're going to see is an administration, a new administration that wants to reduce tariffs, particularly beginning with our allies, and return to a more normal trading relationship. The China situation is going to remain in a state of conflict. Biden's already announced that he's not going to be quick to reduce the tariffs with China. The one area of bipartisan agreement is that we need to get tough with China on both national security grounds, but also on some of their industrial policy and their trade policy. I remind folks that one of the biggest champions in Congress of President Trump's approach to China was Chuck Schumer, the Senate Democratic leader. And so this issue isn't going to fundamentally shift with respect to China. Biden is much more of a multilateralist. He was an advocate of the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. Now, that's already occurred without us, and so we'll have to figure out some way about how we engage. But he's going to support multilateral engagement on the trade front. He's going to bolster the WTO, appoint the judges that are necessary to keep it operating. Trade deals, I think, will be slower in terms of how he pursues those on the agenda, but I do think that they'll become part of the agenda, particularly as we get in beyond the first year of the administration. Of course, the first thing to watch is the UK and the EU. There, as a result of Brexit, there, President Biden is going to take a much more balanced or / deference approach to Ireland and to the rest of the EU than the approach that Trump took, which was very pro-UK in terms of the terms of the Brexit agreement.
I have a question about the PPP program, and you indicated that there's an expectation that additional PPP will be part of the next stimulus. Given that, what do you know about efforts to forgive the original PPP that came out of the CARES Act?
Yeah, well, so forgiveness is occurring. You know, the major issue that we hear from PPP recipients is this question of taxing the PPP loan by essentially taxing that by making expenses paid for with PPP proceeds non-deductible for tax purposes. So, you know, think about the business. You deduct what you're paying your employees, and all of a sudden, if you paid them with PPP funds, that's non-deductible, which effectively makes it makes the proceeds taxed. One element of this bipartisan agreement is to overturn that Treasury interpretation. This was not something that Congress did. Treasury made this decision, and for reasons that are frankly baffling to many, they've insisted on holding this position. If Congress doesn't fix it as part of this bipartisan negotiations that are ongoing, I think a Treasury Secretary Yellen will probably quickly move to overturn the current Treasury Department's decision and fix this issue. That's certainly something we've communicated to the incoming Biden team that we think that they ought to do.
So, last question: you've touched on a couple of the president's announced appointments to the cabinet level. Wondered, without maybe tipping your hand on support and oppose strategy, any kind of observations generally about the folks that he's putting in, areas of concern, or generally, what's your initial reaction to his current appointees?
You know, the press focus has been, and frankly, the transition team's focus has been on stressing the diversity of the appointments. Yes, it's a very diverse group. One could argue, more diverse than prior cabinet and senior level officials in an incoming administration. However, the part they don't stress that we're most interested in actually is the background of these individuals. And if you look at the background, many of them served in government in the Obama administration. Some of them go back to the Clinton administration. A lot of them are people that we've worked with. They're not always people we agree with, but they're very rooted in the processes of government. And how an agency makes a regulation and how you go through public comment and how you consult. I'll tell you virtually, I think every agency landing team has been in contact with the chamber, soliciting our thoughts, our input. They've made clear that we're not going to like everything that they do, but that they're going to have a very open door. And so just from the process of advocacy in government, I think it is going to be much more what many of us have been akin to over the course of our careers than maybe the more ad hoc nature of it that we've experienced the last couple of years. And so that may not necessarily mean that the results are dramatically better in our favor, but it does mean that we'll understand how, we'll be able to anticipate what's going to be done, we'll be able to engage in the process, and hopefully be able to correct really obvious errors, and that'll be a good thing.
Well, Neil, thank you. We appreciate you making some time. I know it's getting close to what hopefully is the end of your day in Washington.
We got 2 or 3 more hours.
There you go.
That's all right.
I also just want to acknowledge to you, your team here on the ground in our part of California, Vartan and Jennings are great resources to us and to the Alliance. They've been very helpful in a lot of behind the scenes work and are active participants with us, and we appreciate those resources. So thank you for the partnership with the Chamber.
Absolutely. And anything we can do, you can reach those guys, you can reach me. We think that the chambers, as evident by the Alliance, we are stronger together, right? And I think that goes to whether you're in those coast counties or whether you're talking about the U.S. Chamber and local chambers. And so anything we can do to be a partner and just to support you, please do let us know.
Thank you very much. So folks, we're going to shift gears a little bit here and bring the focus back to a little closer to home and to Sacramento. Our next speaker is Fred Main. Fred is the managing partner at Clear Advocacy, and he is our official representative for the Alliance in Sacramento. Fred has worked closely with us and with the broader chamber community for a number of years, and we've asked him today to share some insights into the legislature, what's happening as they get started, and how he thinks the next session will begin to unfold. So Fred, would you like me to share my screen with your slides, or would you like to do that on your end?
Why don't you share the screen from your end, Glenn?
You got it. Let me see if we can make that happen here. All right, you're up.
Thanks, Glenn, and it's a pleasure to be with you, even if it's remotely on Zoom. I have always enjoyed a little December trip down to the Alliance to do the annual meeting in person, but I'm glad we're able to get together and do it remotely today. There is a lot going on in California. Neil touched on a lot of the macro issues that are driving the political and policy activity in California, but it's also the election result, both at the legislative level and on ballot measures, which California is always using, and this last November's election was another indication of that. We have uncertainty going on back in DC. We're going to have a new U.S. Senator when Senator Harris resigns her seat, and Governor Newsom has a chance to make an appointment there. And then all of a sudden, the Twitter sphere is going crazy about some articles on Senator Feinstein. And then cabinet positions will be moving around. And then if cabinet positions are moving around, that also means that legislative seats are likely to move as well. So all sorts of crazy things going on in California right now. And let's touch on it. The next slide, please, Glenn. So election 2020, unlike the experience in Washington, D.C., Democrats in California, and I'm really referring to the legislature, the state legislature right now, maintained a dominant position. The Republicans in Congress did win back 4 seats and maintained one that had been part of a special election in the alliance geography with Congressman Garcia. But for the purposes of the state legislature, Democrats continue to maintain a dramatic dominant position. And then on ballot measures, this is really, I think, where the interesting splits are developing in California, or may have already existed and are just being highlighted now. And if you look at the ballot measures, there was a clear split between the legislature and what they were prioritizing and how the voters looked at a number of those issues. Next slide, please, Glenn. The legislature did maintain a dominant position for the Democrats in both houses. There are strong 2/3 vote majorities in the Assembly. The Assembly Democrats did lose 1 seat, and that was in the Alliance area where Suzette Valladares won a seat that had been held by Christy Smith, and there's 1 vacancy right now. In the Senate, the Democrats on election day, or just right after it, actually had 32 seats. They had a gain of 2 with a recapture of took 2 Senate seats in the Orange County area, and 9 Republicans. The Republicans in the Senate are going to have trouble now fielding a team for the annual legislative softball game at 9 members. And then there's 1 vacancy already as a result of Senator Holly Mitchell was elected to the LA County Board of Supervisors and has resigned her seat, and waiting for a special election to be called to fill that seat. But as you can see in both houses, very strong 2/3 vote majorities remain, which is 54 votes in the Assembly, 27 votes in the Senate. And what that allows the Democrats to do is to raise taxes, pass constitutional amendments, or urgency clauses with their own members. And really what's happening in the ongoing development then is that there are some factions developing, the traditional mod Democrats that have been discussed versus the progressives. That really seems to be where more of the action is, versus Democrat and Republican as much. And we'll see how that plays out over the next 2 years. Next slide, please. So the Alliance delegation, we have some new faces, some faces that are in new seats, and then some old faces coming back to take new seats. So Jordan Cunningham, current Assembly member representing San Luis Obispo. Steve Bennett was elected to fill Monique Lamone's seat. Jackie Irwin, who has been just a great champion for the Alliance and really a go-to member to help us out. I've mentioned new member Valladares. John Laird had been in the state assembly, left, was in the administration, and now has won the seat that was held by Bill Monning. He'll be in the state Senate. Monique Lamone went up to the state Senate for Hannah Beth Jackson's seat. Henry Stern and Scott Wilk are continuing to serve in the state Senate. So 5 Democrats, 3 Republicans, and a lot of new faces to get to know, particularly with the expansion of the alliance into all 3 counties completely. Next slide, Glenn. So just a quick review of 2020 legislatively. This is similar to a slide that I talked about last year, what was out, what was in, but really COVID became the issue of the legislature. The legislature was gone for almost 2.5 months, and then met remotely for the last month of the session, and really a number of issues fell off the table with COVID. The legislature actually sent the fewest number of bills in the last 20 years to the governor, and the governor signed the fewest number of bills since 1978. So it really did change the dynamics of the year. There were a few issues that did continue to jump out. The issue of independent contractors versus employees under the Dynamex decision. The legislature continued its approach of providing individual exemptions for individual industries. And as Neil pointed out, that's creating concern on a national level for how California workers may be classified versus their national workers. And then a ballot measure that we'll talk about also addressed it. There were no tax increases as we proposed. When the state started off in January, they're going to have a tremendous budget surplus and use that to address all sorts of things like homelessness. That fell off the table when COVID hit and the state's economy went into a recession. And it's interesting what the impact of that has been in that K-style recovery, and I'll touch on that in just a little bit. So those were really the issues that were dealt with. A lot of regulations, a lot of executive orders, and looking forward to 2021, it's an ongoing dynamic tension that exists between the governor and the legislature in normal times. I think will be one of the themes of what takes place in 2021 now that the legislature is back working on a more full-time basis and how they interact with the governor. Next slide, please. So in 2021, what do we see? Well, we're going to continue to see activity around COVID response. In the next week, actually, California will start administering the first round of vaccines. 327,000 doses are on their way, and that will go to frontline healthcare workers, primarily in hospitals. And then the next round would go to individuals residing in nursing homes. There will be another round of vaccines arriving at the end of the month, and that should hopefully take care of all of the frontline healthcare workers and individuals living in nursing homes. And then quickly in January, another 1.2 to 1.5 million, so that the state can start vaccinating people. Housing will be a big issue in the state again. And I think we'll see some interesting alliances there between different groups that may, builders, more liberal Democrats on how to do housing. Decarbonization is becoming a buzzword. What it really means is that the legislature is going to look at issues like prohibitions on banning, which the governor is banning fracking, which the governor has talked about, whether or not new building standards will severely limit or prohibit use of natural gas in new construction. There's already a bill introduced in just the first days of the new legislature that would limit that in new state buildings. Continuing discussion of who's an employee now. So the Dynamex decision has not been completely resolved, and we'll continue to see that. And then on taxes and spending, it is unlikely that there will be a tax increase proposed by the legislature this year. In the K-style recovery that we're seeing, California is actually ahead significantly in tax receipts than what they would have thought in July. The governor predicts it's $15 billion. The legislative analyst says it's $26 billion, so somewhere in between. And because of that K-style recovery, high tech, services, a number of sectors that pay well and have high income individuals, which California depends on for its personal income taxes, are still doing well. And so I think that there will be a lot of discussion about taxes, but I don't think that this year will be a tax increase year. And with the additional revenue, we may, or the state may, kind of make it through the budget year without tremendous additional cuts, particularly in healthcare, that is a key part of the California economy. Next slide, please. So now we're at musical chairs. As I said, when the slides were done, there was one U.S. Senate seat that was going to be available. The Attorney General, currently in California, has been appointed as a cabinet member. So that will be an appointment. And then all of the additional moves that are required or that are triggered by those two appointments will make it very interesting to watch California politics. Just about everybody and their brother and sister and are in some way or another in somebody's list for the U.S. Senate seat or the Attorney General's position. Right now, I think that the lead candidate for the U.S. Senate seat is Secretary of State Padilla. He's been very close to the governor historically, and he would be a first as an appointment for a Latino U.S. Senator. But there is a tremendous amount of pressure on the governor now to appoint an African-American woman to the seat because of the current holder is African-American. For the Attorney General's position, it just, everybody is on someone's list. I think if you hear anybody out there in the alliance world that wants to join on, let me know. We'll maybe see if we can get them added in. If the governor gets to make the Senate seat appointment completely on his own, it's not subject to legislative approval or veto. If he appoints Secretary of State Padilla, that would open up another seat for him. In making appointments to the Attorney General and the Secretary of State's office, the legislature does have some veto authority in that. And so they have their interests and concerns also need to be taken into consideration. We've already seen a special election or anticipate a special election for the Holly Mitchell seat. And then that will trigger more elections. So California is going to be very active politically between now and I would say June of 2021. Next slide, please. And then I did want to touch bases on the big ballot measures just briefly. There were 12 measures on the state ballot in November. 5 passed, 7 failed. $750 million was spent on ballot measures. That's believed to be a record. One measure, Prop 22, was anticipated in excess of $200 million would be spent by the proponents, primarily Lyft and Uber. But I wanted to touch bases just briefly on this kind of difference between how the legislature and maybe the voters are looking at things. The first big one was Prop 15, which was the $11 billion split roll property tax on commercial industrial property. It failed 48 yes, 52 no. And a lot of capital insiders were looking to that as to whether or not the voters might have an appetite for higher taxes, particularly since the tax increase was primarily on corporations and not individuals. The business community ran a very strong campaign against it. And I think that the loss will probably put a dampener on much in the way of real desire to increase other taxes, at least through 2021. Prop 21, which was rent control for the second time, lost dramatically 40.1 to 59.6. And as the legislature looks at the issue of housing and rent control, tenant rights, eviction issues, I think the Prop 21 vote will bear a lot of impact. And then finally, Prop 22, this is the ballot measure that was drafted by Uber and Lyft to create a new classification for the workers in Uber, Lyft, Postmates, transportation platform companies. And it passed 58.6 to 41.4. And it was really in response to the inability of the legislature, the governor, and the industry to come to a legislative solution. And so the businesses just put a measure on the ballot and passed it. And I think as Neil considers how to address the gig economy or workers on a national level, Prop 22 is very likely to become a key factor in that discussion. And I think it will then trigger additional conversations in the legislature about who is a worker and how they should be categorized for this Dynamex style decision. So those are some of the trends that I see. What, we can look forward to 2021. It'll be a fascinating year, and we'll see if the legislature and the governor can pull back a little bit of the economy and get things going again.
Thanks, Fred. We appreciate that. Couple of questions for you. You've touched a little bit on the relationship between the governor and the legislature. Do you see an effort on the part of the legislature to rebalance that relationship and maybe reassert some of their control or influence on policy? And
I do see an effort to do that. I think where it will probably materialize itself in the greatest extent is in the budget. The legislature during COVID wasn't able to conduct the same level of oversight of the governor's budget, and the governor was spending the COVID relief money appropriate. It was his to spend, but the legislature felt that they had not been consulted as much. And now that the legislature is back meeting in session, even if sometimes remotely, I think that will be balanced out. Also, I think the governor, part of any administration, has had a little bit of a stumble in his, this is the end of his second year. He was the focus of a tremendous amount of press for going to a dinner at a high-end restaurant in the Napa Valley and maybe not following all of the protocols to their pure spirit. And so the legislature, I think, will just, based on some of those things, exert additional authority in the relationship.
a couple of questions that maybe play off of that theme a little bit. What's the degree of collateral damage the governor has taken over the stay-at-home orders? How seriously is the governor's office taking the recall effort? Some of those. What's your sense on where's the governor? How wounded is he?
I don't think that he, for those that are Monty Python fans and maybe have watched the Battle of the Black Knight, I certainly think that he has all of his arms and legs and most of his digits with him. I do think in a most recent poll from the Public Policy Institute of California, which is probably the leading public polling firm in California, they just released their most recent poll for through the end of November, and the governor's approval ratings for handling COVID and the response are still very high, 58%. So that's a strong response for him. Now, some of that was out in the field before all of the press hit, and we might see a little bit of that change. And it was before the second round of semi-shutdowns that the state is going through now. He has recently just hired a new senior staffer, a gentleman named Jim DeBoo, who has tremendous experience in positioning and management and running kind of behind the scenes governmental activity. His current chief of staff, Ann O'Leary, is leaving, anticipated to get a Biden appointment. And there had been some speculation that while she's very good at understanding Washington, D.C., she hadn't been quite as good at understanding Sacramento. And Jim DeBoo is meant to provide a little bit of support there. So, there's certainly a lot of time to get the ship actually back on course, not even right it. And I don't think that he suffered tremendous damage yet.
Very good. I had a question that says, we continue to see large numbers of people leaving the state. Has there been any more discussion about the wealth and exit tax that was discussed earlier this year?
I think I would expect that there will be a bill reintroduced on the wealth tax. Introducing a bill is relatively easy. I would be very surprised if it were to move. I would be somewhat surprised if it gets a hearing, and I'd be shocked if it actually moved off of the floor of the House of its introduction. I think it's very hard to do an exit tax. I think we'll hear discussions of it, but I would be surprised if either of those are successful. We do have a very progressive contingent as part of the legislature, and they're kind of oblivious to some of the realities that might be taking place in the economy and with folks leaving. But I think that a bigger part of the group or of the legislature understands that you got to be careful about taxing the golden goose and killing that goose.
Last question I think we'll have time for. Have you heard anything about changes in the timeline around redistricting? If the process gets delayed in releasing the census data, is there a chance that June 2022 elections primaries get delayed?
I have not heard that. Doesn't mean it hasn't occurred, but I have not heard that. The redistricting commission has just finished 2 months ago filling out its membership, and I saw that they just hired their deputy executive director. I haven't heard or seen too much yet on where they are in the actual workings of getting going with hearings, things like that.
Well, Fred, thank you very much. Again, we appreciate your guidance and your representation for us in Sacramento. It's very helpful to have boots on the ground, and we appreciate your willingness to play that role for us. So thank you.
You're welcome.
So folks, if I could just briefly, I'm going to try and share my screen again for just a moment. I want to, in addition to thank you, Fred and Neil, for joining us today, I want to thank those of you that are part of the Chamber Alliance's Capital Circle program. These businesses provide financial support, but also active guidance and input into our policy platform and our advocacy outreach efforts. And so we appreciate their involvement in the program. And as we wrap up today, I wanted to just acknowledge the Chamber's CEOs from your communities that serve on our board. You can see that list there on your screen. It's a treat to work with a team of professionals who come to work every day, committed to making a difference for their businesses and their communities. With that, we will wrap up the program here, if I can figure out my screen. There we are. We'll wrap up today by thanking everyone for joining us and for supporting the advocacy work we do for you. We look forward to another year of robust engagement as we try and educate and advocate in Sacramento and in Washington, D.C. We wish everyone a happy and healthy holidays, and perhaps just as importantly, a prosperous new year. God bless. We'll see you all soon. Thank you.